Bodhi in the Brain, Part 16. How you doing, everyone? This is Morgan O. Smith here. Just continuing on my weekly discussion on subjects that are in my upcoming book, Bodhi in the Brain. This week we're talking about resistance and how resistance leads to suffering. So what I'm saying here, that resistance is things that we do to resist, and we resist a lot of things. We resist situations, events, things that are happening in our lives. We're conditioned to resist them, especially when they don't feel good. What I'm proposing here is that you stop resisting. You allow things to happen just the way they are. Now, I'm not talking about the things that you can control. I'm talking about the things that you can't control. For one thing, your thoughts. As you notice, thoughts come in your mind. They come and they go. You can't resist those. Those are meant to be there. That's the functioning of your amazing brain that you have in your head. The most advanced, probably the most advanced mechanism in the whole entire universe, and that's your brain. And for it to do what it does what it does. And sometimes what comes out of the brain, especially through your thoughts, through your mind, can be uncomfortable. But your job is to become the witness and allow them to flow. Let them do what it's supposed to do. And that's when you, as I said, you become the witness and you allow that to flow. And if you're able to do that successfully, you end at least a good portion of your suffering, because suffering comes from resistance. And there's a word for that. In Buddhism, they call this dukkha. And when I say suffering, I don't necessarily mean extreme suffering, like, say, for example, like going through a famine or going through a situation where your life is in danger, things like that. Those count as well. But I'm talking about your everyday stuff, the things that you go through on a daily basis, and there's only a certain percent of stuff that you can control. The rest of it is out of your control. So the things that are out of your control, your job is to learn to stop resisting. It doesn't mean that you're supposed to accept and love everything that's happening outside of your control. What I'm saying is that you stop resisting what's coming at you, or what's happening in your presence, or what's happening, especially in the mind and things of that sort, the operation of the mind and all that. So when you become the witness, and when I mean become the witness, this is where the word stillness comes from, because a lot of people believe that when we talk about stillness, we're talking about sitting in meditation and being still. That's just a part of it. But what we're talking about here is being neutral. So that's what we mean by stillness in this standpoint. So by being neutral, and whatever happens, let it happen. So as the late Bill Harris said, whatever happens, let it be okay. My saying is, whatever happens in the mind, let it be fine. So these things are supposed to happen. It's your brain is designed that way. And because your brain does all these amazing feats on a daily basis, one of the side effects is passing thoughts. And as we all know, not all thoughts are comfortable. And these are different types of thoughts. These could be thoughts of thinking about the past, thinking about what's happening in the present, and thinking about what's happening in the future. So the future hasn't happened yet. The past is already gone, and all you have right now, right here, is the present. When you become totally still, or when you become totally neutral, you realize that all there ever was and all there ever will be is the present moment. So the past, everything that's happened in the past is happening in the present. Of course, everything that's happening in the present is happening right now in the present. And anything that will happen in the future can only happen right here in the present. And when you realize that, I mean, truly realize this, I don't mean you taking this in on an intellectual level and understanding this. I really mean when you really realize that everything is happening right now in the present, there's a certain amount of your suffering that ends. So there's a certain amount of dukkha that goes away. And of course, the Buddha says, all life is suffering. And he's right. All life is suffering. Part of the reason here that you're here is to quote unquote suffer, because you are God, or you are the self, or you are the no self, and you're doing the opposite of what you actually are. So you're experiencing the opposite of what you actually go through, and the opposite that what you actually go through would be suffering. And when I say suffering, we mean dis-ease, being uncomfortable, feeling regret, feeling guilt and shame, and the list goes on. But another part of this suffering is caused by attachment, because when you're attached to something and you really become attached to that thing, it causes more suffering, because when you attach to something, you create resistance when I mean that, you create resistance to the opposite of what you don't want. So you have the thing that you want, and you have to do everything in your power to make sure that you hold on to that thing that you're holding on to. So you do everything in your power to do that. But to do that, you have to resist everything that's the opposite of what you like and what you have and what you're attached to. And that's a form of resistance as well. So if you can end that, you end all suffering. If you end all suffering, you experience happiness, liberation, absolute bliss, and the list goes on of all the different terms you may hear. And these things are true. But of course, can one end all suffering? I don't believe you can. There's always a certain amount of suffering that you have to go through, because again, as I said, the Buddha said, all life is suffering. So I don't believe there's a way that you can actually end your suffering permanently, but you can end a good portion of that. The unnecessary suffering or dukkha that you don't necessarily have to go through. So that's it with resistance, with suffering and attachment. So if you can learn to not attach to the things that are happening in your life, and I'm talking about the good and the bad things, because we do cling on to bad things as well. If you have malice towards someone, that's attachment, right? Especially if something happened to you, if someone did something to you years ago, and you still hold malice towards that person, that's a form of attachment. So that's something that you can consider to be negative, and you can't let go of it. So every time that person's name comes up, or you see a picture of that person, or you see a family member who's related to that person, you get triggered. Well, that's a form of attachment, right? And of course, you can be attached to good things. So like, just say one day you win an award. It's the happiest day of your life. You just won this award, right? But then next year comes along and somebody else wins that award, right? If you cling on to that, that can also cause a form of suffering as well. So, you won the award. Of course, you should be happy about that, and you can celebrate. You can do all the things that you do with that, and then you just let it go. You won this award. It can never be taken away from you. This is yours. But this happened this year. Next year, it's probably going to be someone else, right? So if you cling on to that, that would cause a form of discomfort as well. So you want to let go of that. You want things to come, and you want things to go. Nothing is permanent. So if you can really take that in, and again, not intellectually, but really realize that everything comes and goes, that everything is not permanent, you can end a certain percentage of that quote unquote suffering. So again, that is called dukkha, and we're human, so we all go through this, but through meditation, especially through using Yinnergy, you can reduce a lot of that suffering by a good amount, and you'll realize that when you reduce that amount of suffering, how much life becomes. You realize that life becomes easier. I will say, you can experience absolute no suffering, like you can experience zero suffering, and that happens, of course, as I mentioned many times before. This happens at the moment of a spiritual awakening. This happens at the moment of enlightenment. So in that moment of enlightenment, or in a spiritual awakening, you'll realize that all suffering has come to an end, temporarily anyway. So all of it comes to an end, and you realize in that moment, even if you never considered yourself to be a one that suffers, you realize in that moment that you've been going through this ease the whole entire time. You just didn't notice it. So in that moment, when this happens, when you experience absolute liberation, when you experience moksha, when you experience nirvana, you realize in that moment that your suffering has come to an end. And it's an incredible feeling when you experience that. That's not all that happens, but that's part of what happens in that moment. And it's an experience that cannot be explained. It has to be experienced. And when you go through that, you realize why meditation and other spiritual practice are important in regards to at least bringing a portion of this to an end. And this happens again through a spiritual awakening, Can also happen, again, through spiritual enlightenment. I put spiritual awakening, spiritual enlightenment in two different categories. But in that moment, when that happens, you realize that that comes to an end, at least temporarily. Even though your true self, the witness that's witnessing everything that's happening, is always at peace and never suffers. It's always a witness. It's always neutral. It's always still. It's always stillness. Watching its own creation, its own manifestation happening as it happens, as it's supposed to happen. So when you come to realize that you are not the ego, the sense of self that is experiencing everything in existence, that behind all that, there is the actual self, the essence, the true essence of who you actually are. And that essence of who you actually are, whether you call it the self, the no self, the void, the empty witness, the ultimate neutral aspect of all that is, you realize in that moment that you have never suffered. And suffering is just a manifestation of your own design, of your own thinking, of your own imagination, your own design. And you are causing all suffering that's happening throughout the whole entire universe. You're causing that. And when I say you, I also mean me, because we are the same thing, if you want to put it that way. So we are causing all suffering that's happening throughout the entire planet, throughout the whole entire solar system, throughout the whole entire universe. And all of that is made up by you, by me, which is the essence of all things. This is existence itself. All right? Suffering comes along with that. That's the consequence that happens just to exist as what we are as human beings, or as animals, as single cell organisms, whatever the case is. All that stuff is everything that's happening there, from human beings all the way down, or from human beings all the way up. Suffering is part of the deal. But as I said, in the moment of enlightenment, or in the moment of a spiritual awakening, even in the moment of a spiritual experience, because that's another category, you can experience that coming to an end. So that's it for this week. Bodhi in the brain. Of course, the topic, again, as I said, is suffering, resistance. And just to make it clear, resistance, what you resist, is the cause of your personal suffering. You want to end your personal suffering? Stop the resistance. It sounds simple. Of course, we all know that's not that simple. But you can start trying to make progress in regards to that through meditation. And as I said before, Yinnergy is a great way to take you there. That can help you reduce your suffering by a lot. So that's it. That's it for me. This is Morgan O. Smith. Take care. Make sure to pick up Bodhi in the Brain once it comes out. It should be out in May. And I cover suffering, a bit of it in this book here, but of course the whole entire book is about ending your suffering, or ending dukkha. Take care, everyone. Peace.